Kia ora koutou. Small but intimate audience here tonight, and shout out to our Mayor, Rehead. Thank you for coming along, and obviously those of you who've taken up the taki, come along tonight to listen in, and equally to those online. I'll just start with the karakia. Then we'll just do a bit of a mini health and safety brief for those physically present here. Then I'll introduce our keynote speaker, Kate. Tā kuni ino tātou i te araku manaki mātou i huhui nei tēnei rā, mo te mahi kia mātou, mahia i a mātou. Homoa kia mātou te kaha ki te mahi i a mātou mahi te whakatūtoki i a mātou whāinga. Āmene. My name is Ben Green. I'm the Group Manager and Group Controller for Tairāwhiti Emergency Management, and on behalf of my team here, Dallas Haynes, who's our Group Welfare Chair, and Marcus Tibble who deals with the readiness, and that's the training engagement within the community. And small team, but we pump out a fair amount of mahi, keeping everyone in our region connected, and look to continue that. Just in terms of the brief for the site here, you're currently sitting in a tsunami zone, so it's a good segue into the theme tonight around tsunami and what Kate's about to talk to. In the event of an earthquake, we just adopt the drop, cover and hold. After the assessment around anything that then presents a tsunami risk, we will then direct people through to the evacuation point up towards Whataupoko, heading up towards Waitiara Park. If you don't know where that is, hopefully if we're running in front of you, just follow us. The session tonight, and we've got Kate Borson from Illuminate Science. Limited in time. I know there's probably a desire across the rohe to have Kate come into every area that's physically not tenable, but the fact we do have a live stream with this, it is being recorded. We have another session tomorrow night at 6 p.m, same time, same place, and equally tomorrow afternoon specifically for schools, and very much a focus in terms of their challenge of dealing with particularly children and what it takes to either evacuate out of a zone or the actions in terms of being prepared for that. It's quite key, particularly anyone who's a parent online really, and of course, rather than me tell boards to have a plan, it's far more powerful when you ask the parents for the school, what is our plan? And rather than throw the schools under the bus, so to speak, tomorrow's session really is around helping to facilitate and actually assist them in terms of the products we do for that. Now, when I first met Kate back in 2021, we did exactly that same scenario for the schools, a session, and you may remember back your worship for that. 7 days later was the 5th of March, and for those that may recall, the 5th of March 2021 was where the region had firstly a 7.8 earthquake up just off Tairāwhiti, that was 100 kilometres offshore, followed by 2 more very large and significant earthquakes up in the Kermadec Islands, 800 kilometres north of East Cape. All 3 of those events recorded small tsunami. They were recorded on a Lawton Point tsunami gauge, and it's from that day why, particularly for the emergency management function, we really set us on a pathway to being outside of the tsunami zone in an event that we are going to deal with our most catastrophic event, which will be a Hikurangi magnitude 9 tsunami. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Kate, our learned and expert that's certainly very adept at taking us through these. Thank you, Kate.
Kia ora, welcome. Thank you everyone for coming this evening. Before I start, I did just want to acknowledge the Natural Hazards Commission who have funded this roadshow tour across the North Island, and of course the Taranaki Emergency Management Team and Gisborne District Council as well. So kia ora, my name is Kate. I grew up surrounded by the volcanoes in Auckland and then have moved down to the floodplains of the Hawke's Bay, where I now live, and of course am visiting this beautiful city today. So I work with scientists and emergency managers sharing all the latest information around our natural hazard risk as well. So I started at university learning about natural hazards and realizing that disasters don't actually need to happen, okay? Because there's a lot of things that we can do to manage how we act and respond to these events. And so this is kind of where I started my journey in working with a whole range of scientists as well. So this is my artwork. This is my depiction of how an emergency can be, okay? It can be a little bit all over the place, but I guess what I'm also trying to show is that it doesn't have to be, okay? There's a lot of plans and preparations and work that we can do ahead of time to make that journey a whole lot smoother, okay? It's never going to be a straight line. We're definitely going to have ups and downs along the way, but the more that we do now before the next event, the better prepared and the easier that it will going to be. So the information I'm going to share with you tonight will hopefully encourage you to do those actions so that your journey is a little bit smoother for when these big events do happen. So also, I want to say a big thank you to you guys coming along tonight, because being here is showing like leadership in your community. I always tell the story of Tilly. Tilly, do you remember the Bali 2004 Boxing Day tsunami? So Tilly was 11, okay? And Tilly was on the beach with her family, and she had been learning in the weeks before at school the natural warning signs of a tsunami. And so Tilly noticed that the whole water was receding when she was down on the beach. And she told her dad and mum at the time, and she, with her parents, they evacuated an entire beach full of tourists to safety, okay? And so just for me, that shows the power that one person with one knowledge can have to have an impact in their community. In that case, Tilly saved hundreds of lives just from learning one piece of knowledge, okay? And so hopefully you guys can also be Tillys as well, passing on what you learn to other people in your community. So tonight I'm going to cover all the information that you need to kind of understand the basics of earthquakes and tsunami. I'm going to introduce you a little bit more specifically into the Hikurangi subduction zone, because it's one of our largest sources of earthquake and tsunami risk. And then we're kind of going to plan and prepare for kind of what may happen in the next 50 years or so, I guess. Okay, but I want to play a game first. What is this on the screen? Can anyone guess?
Stick.
Not a stick. It is related to our topic tonight.
Barrier or an obstacle?
No, not quite. It's a line, and it's usually used to depict something around earthquakes.
Richter scale.
Not the Richter scale.
The end pathway of the tsunami?
This I'm using to depict as a fault, okay? So scientists have been mapping all of the active faults across New Zealand, and what this looks like is literally a line on a map. That's what we see it depicted as, okay? But what I wanted to share this with you is that a fault is not a line on a map. It's actually an area between two kind of pieces of the land, if that makes sense. Okay, so that means a fault has like a length and it also has a depth. So I'm kind of taking you back to schools. Oh, here's my other one. And so I'm going to dive a little bit more into this concept, and it will kind of piece together and come together as we go through. But what I'm going to look through is like what causes earthquakes, how do we measure them, and then what do earthquakes cause themselves, and how do they impact us? So we know, earthquakes occur on faults, which are weaknesses in the Earth's crust. And we can map out where these faults are, and we've actually done a really incredible job of this. So if you search the GNS active faults database, you can see all the active faults that had ruptured in the last 200,000 years. And NIWA's also done a really awesome job of mapping out offshore faults as well, one of which is the Hikurangi subduction zone. So earthquakes are measured in two different ways. There's usually two different types. So the first is the magnitude, and this is measured by a number, and it's determined by the fault size, the slip, so that's the area of the fault that moves, so remember it is an area, not just a line, the type of rock, and also how many faults rupture. So that was one of the learnings that we had from the Kaikoura earthquake, is that we can have multiple faults rupture in one time. So, for example here, so when we're looking at the Hikurangi subduction zone, we could say it's 500 kilometers long and 150 kilometers deep, okay? So that's the area of the fault that has the potential to rupture. And if that area ruptures, it's equivalent to a magnitude 8.9 earthquake, okay? So when we're talking about the subduction zone, it's a very long and wide, and it's one of the biggest types of faults that you can get. Oh, and then I've got, we've skipped ahead. And then I've also got this image here because I wanted to show the relative size of the different events when we're looking at it. So here you'll see a magnitude 8 versus the magnitude 8.9, okay? So every magnitude we go up, it's kind of like 32 times the magnitude, so it's an exponential scale. So originally when I started working on the Hikurangi subduction zone, we were talking about a magnitude 8.9 earthquake. And we got like 30 to 40 scientists from across New Zealand, and we sat them in the room for a day and we got them to determine what they thought was a credibly sized earthquake that could occur on the Hikurangi subduction zone. So that was about 2018, and now at a national level they're working on a magnitude 9 earthquake, and you'll also see scenarios up to a magnitude 9.1 as well, which is similar to the Tohoku, Japan earthquake and tsunami. So magnitude is like a number. That number doesn't really change. It's determined by scientists. Whereas intensity is another measure, okay? But that's a measure that you and I make because it's how we feel that earthquake, the level of shaking that we feel. And so that's going to be different based on where we are. So has anyone ever filled out a GeoNet felt report? Yep, so when you're doing that, you're acting like a scientist and you're determining the intensity of that earthquake where you are. And so when we're referring to the intensity, we usually talk about weak or strong or severe or extreme levels of shaking, okay? And so it's a continuum scale. So the magnitude will have one earthquake magnitude, but intensity will vary based on where we are. Okay, so that means, putting it a little bit together, we have our fault rupture that can that would call as a magnitude 8.9 earthquake, and that 8.9 earthquake can cause minutes of shaking. So depending on where you are, it could be moderate, strong, severe, and extreme, okay? But also how an earthquake changes over time, it could start out moderate, and it could peak with extreme, and it could go back to moderate, okay? So we have a whole range of intensities during that one earthquake because of how those waves are traveling through the surface. So one of the things that we talk about is, have you guys heard the saying, long or strong, get gone? Great, everyone's nodding their heads. So we say long or strong, and it's really important that that or is here. So a long earthquake is anything longer than a minute. And so in the past, off the coast of Tairāwhiti, there have been earthquakes that have felt as really long earthquakes, but long and slow, that have caused a tsunami. And then we also have those strong earthquakes where it's hard to stand up in that do also. So it's important that we think about both. But my recommendation is with that long earthquake, as soon as you feel that earthquake shaking, you count it out in your head. So from the research that we've done, people really overestimate and also underestimate the length of the earthquake shaking. So it's really important that you count that time out in your head. And I also like it as a way to kind of calm yourself down as well, because you're focusing on the counting rather than the shaking. Okay, so long or strong, get gone. So the next thing we're going to get to is what causes tsunami. So there's a whole range of different hazards that cause a tsunami. The main cause of a tsunami, I think it's around 80% of the time, is an earthquake. Earthquake shaking can also cause landslides as well. And when we have that material that enters the water, or we can also have underwater landslides, so again, material displacing water, we can also cause tsunami as well. We can have, in a very unlikely event, a meteorite strike the surface of the earth. And we can also have volcanic eruptions as well that do cause tsunami. And this all leads to inundation. So this slide I just put in because I just wanted to show you. So this is one of the biggest underwater landslides in the world, which is right off the coast of kind of Ruatoria Way. So you can see that kind of mapped out the extent there. So these types of events in terms of tsunami can also occur off this coast here as well, not just earthquakes. Okay, so we know that earthquakes can cause tsunami. And so for the last couple of years, I've been working on a project with researchers from DNS Science and Massey and University of Canterbury, as well as a range of other institutions. And what we've looked at is modeling tsunami evacuation locations. So what's that shown us is, so for example, in Gisborne, if we use the 2018 census, we estimate there's going to be like 16,000 people at nighttime within the evacuation zone, and around 20,000 people during the daytime. So it's quite like a high level of population density if you compare it to other areas across Tairāwhiti as well. So for this research work, we use the target evacuation time of 30 minutes. So this is based on one of the scenarios that we were looking at. And so there is a whole range of numbers that you may see. But the 30 minutes was from the arrival from the earthquake to the arrival of the first tsunami wave.
Anywhere along the coast?
Just for Gisborne specifically. Yeah, so that was specifically for Poverty Bay area. And so I've added this in so you can see the number of people that are evacuating to safety during the daytime and the nighttime. And we also did like an optimistic level as well as what we thought it looked like. So you can see that there are numbers of people that don't actually evacuate to safety in time, unfortunately. So what we've found is that we've got that higher population density in town, specifically during the daytime. We also have long walking distances to safety. And just so you're aware, this modelling is based on walking times, not considering multimodal, so no cars or biking, so just walking. We also saw congested evacuation routes, especially over the bridges as well, in terms of becoming quite key bottlenecks. And so one of the things that we also encourage when we say long or strong, get gone, we say evacuate by foot or bike, okay? And why we say foot or bike is that we know in those more built up congested areas, we're gonna experience bottlenecks with traffic jams. And so we also know that there's gonna be like liquefaction is likely, in some areas landslides as well. And so our usual routes may be blocked. And what we've seen in other places from around the world is that we end up people leaving their cars in locations and then evacuating by foot. But if we evacuate by foot, we're actually freeing up area. And then biking is a faster way to get to safety. So that's why we encourage that one there. So then what we looked at is what are the solutions that we have for this congestion? And so looking at other places around the world that are dealing with similar risks than us, we see the use of vertical evacuation structures. Sorry, I have it as VES in there. So when we put in vertical evacuation structures into the modelling, it significantly increased the number of people that reach safety within that 30-minute window. And reminder, this is just for one scenario as well. So it was especially helpful during nighttime when there's like more people that were likely to be at home based on the area, and it shows in the model that it is going to be a life-saving aspect as well. But it does require a lot of planning. It also requires trust from the community in terms of using them and confidence as well. So there are some challenges with vertical evacuation use as well, is that they do isolate people in one place and can be crowded. So it's also a matter of like how you have that conversation with the community in terms of how it's used and who uses it as well. When we've surveyed people as part of international surveys, only around a quarter to half of the population are interested in using them, and other people would prefer to evacuate. So that it kind of emphasizes that trust in the science as well. Uses intention does increase when there's food, water, and medical supplies in the vertical evacuation structure. And also there needs to be discussions around priority access as well, and also evacuation drills to kind of reinforce the usage of those events as well. So I did some work over in Washington State with a Costa school. And Acosta School was the first school in their district, and when they were building their new gymnasium, they actually built a vertical evacuation structure. So it meant that the whole school and also wider school community who were out on a peninsula could evacuate to safety, and it could hold around 1,000 people on the top of their school building. They designed it so that they had supplies in the corners of each of those on the top of the rooftop, and that their drainage, their like drain system that comes off, what are they called? They're like downpipes. Yeah, actually became toilets as well. So a lot of thought went into the planning and design of that, and it's perfectly fit for that community at currently. So these are some images of vertical evacuation structures from Japan. So the top one saved around 44 people, the bottom one about 330. The issue here, you can see I've circled this boat that's like stuck halfway up. And so what actually happened here, and this is one of the challenges that sometimes is faced, is that there was so much debris across the bottom floors that people actually weren't able to safely evacuate. So they were there for a couple of days before they were able to get out. But it does show, so there was concerns, I think, when these were built, that 5 stories was not going to be high enough. But you can see kind of that debris line around where that debris got to. Okay, so they are well in use in Japan, for sure. Is it going to play? Yeah. Okay, so to the main event, the Hikurangi subduction zone. Why do we care? How will it impact us? So the Hikurangi subduction zone, from this very small image, is actually, if we go back to my image of the fault, is actually an area, okay? Because it's the boundary between the Pacific plate and the Australian plate. So we have to think about it not just as a line, so you can see the plate boundary running off the coast, but it's actually an area which is beneath our feet. Okay, because one plate is subducting down underneath the other, and the subduction zone is this area here in my hands. So it has been active 10 times over the last 7,000 years. And we know that it's going to be active again. So subduction zones are responsible for producing the largest earthquake and tsunami in the world, as we saw in Japan in 2011. So the Prime Minister at the time said that there was the starkest crisis Japan has faced in a generation, okay? So this size of event hasn't occurred in New Zealand within a kind of like our living memory in terms of a lifetime. And the level and the extent of this damage is relatively significant. So the most recent rupture was a southern rupture around 500 years ago, and we do have a 1 in 4 chance of another earthquake occurring in the next 50 years as well. So these are the four last subduction zone earthquakes. So we have some that were mostly part of the plate boundary, and then we have 2 larger kind of full boundary ruptures. So one around 850 years ago and one about 1,400 years ago, where we've actually got evidence of the tsunami wave off the coast of the top of the South Island and also all the way up to the coast of Gisborne as well. So there's like a This has got a 95% confidence interval when it comes to these dates and these past events. So from this kind of like last 2,000 years, sorry, not 2,000, not 200, these occur every kind of 500 years. So when it comes to our exposure, 77% of New Zealand's population lives in the North Island, and 65% of the New Zealand lives within 5 kilometres of the sea. We've got high coastal populations, as we can see in Gisborne, and we've also kind of got congested routes as well, because this isn't something that, you know, when they were planning the towns, they weren't building in tsunami evacuation routes necessarily. We also, when we look at the national surveys overall, have low preparedness for managing without power, water, phone or internet. And I'm sure Ben would tell me that's definitely not the case here in Gisborne, because I know you guys have experienced more recent events than that and have done really well, have managed to get through. And we also don't have the experience of dealing with this kind of catastrophic level disaster in our living memory as well. So I've got 3 maps up here, and these 3 maps kind of show you a few different things. So the first one on the left is our latest national seismic hazard model. So you can see kind of the yellow and the orange area. That shows you where we have kind of our highest level of seismic risk in the country. So it effectively follows the Alpine Fault in the South Island, and then kind of up past Wellington, along the coast, along the Hikurangi Subduction Zone. And so this is the first time that the National Seismic Hazard Model has taken into account kind of our risk from the Hikurangi Subduction Zone to the extent. So you can see...
That's in terms of tsunami, or is that in terms of like an earth, you know, running through?
The left is like the level of shaking we'd experience from like all possible earthquakes.
I'm trying to get the volcanic plateau, which has been pretty seismically active, but doesn't produce tsunamis, obviously, to the same degree. It does do damage. So is the bit where it's purple the deepest, or is the bit on the outside the deepest?
No, so this is the level of... Yeah. And then we've got our next map, and our next map is for a 2,500 year tsunami, like wave height. And you can see along the coast, we've kind of got some black and pink areas up near Gisborne where we would expect kind of like relatively high wave heights for that event. And then the third one is actually our population density. So the darker colors show our highly populated areas. So you can see it is pretty much like along that east coast, we've got a high level of population density. And so that's all adding to our risk profile, I guess, as a country as well. So how will it impact us? So we unfortunately don't have a crystal ball, but what we do is we bring together all of our available science knowledge and our experience from the past, research, and we use this to kind of build up a scenario of what may happen in the future. And these scenarios are really useful for planning and preparing as well. So the one that I've most recently worked on is an 8.9 magnitude earthquake and tsunami. And you'll also see that there's some planning being done for magnitude 9 and also now 9.1 events as well. Okay, so 8.9, that's our magnitude. And we know that if we have an 8.9 magnitude earthquake, we're probably going to experience minutes of shaking. And so if we're experiencing minutes of shaking, what do you think that means we need to do?
Run.
Drop, cover, and hold. Drop, cover, and hold as our first action. And so what we know is that we've done a bit of research on whether people like actually do drop, cover, and hold. And when we do research, people say that they look after or protect their children or their dependents. They potentially run outside or stand in doorways, which is very outdated advice. And some say they do nothing because they're waiting for that earthquake to continue or to get stronger. Okay, so this is from the research. So 26% said that they did self-protective actions. Some 10% did provided assistance to others. And so you can see it's kind of like an interesting makeup there of like how people respond to earthquake shaking. Oh, I'm missing a slide, I don't know what happened there. And so what I really want to emphasize here is that we drop, cover, and hold because we're getting down to like gravity, and we're protecting our heads and also our internal organs as we get into that position. But it also means that we're not moving around as well. And so we know that a large number of the injuries that occurred during the Kaikoura earthquake were actually from people that moved during that earthquake shaking. From the surveys that we've done, a high level of people say that they don't practice there or do their drop, cover, hold because they are embarrassed to do it, okay? But as we know, earthquake shaking can change over time. So what it may feel like light shaking may become strong or severe shaking. And we need to be in that position before the earthquake gets to that strong shaking, okay? So in this scenario, we need to lead by example. Has anyone seen the psychology video when someone gets into the lift facing the wrong way? So there's a video and it shows, so usually you stand facing the lift doors, and it shows you someone getting in and they stand the opposite direction facing the wall. And then slowly over time, as more people get into the lift, they all stand facing the wall. And it shows you how natural it is to follow other people's examples in terms of human behavior. And so we kind of want to do the same thing with drop, cover, and hold. So someone has to be the leader to set the example for other people to do that drop, cover, and hold. Okay? Because we know that other people will follow your behavior. Cool. Okay, so with that 8.9 scenario, we developed 3 different rupture scenarios, okay? So in that area that I showed you, it can rupture from south to north, north to south, or it could rupture in the middle and spread outwards, if that makes sense, that area. So this shows you the southern rupture scenario. So you can see Tairāwhiti. It's pretty much in red there. And that means that Tairāwhiti will experience extreme levels of shaking in this scenario. And what we see is that because of the rock structure beneath our feet, you tend to experience earthquakes a whole lot more than kind of Bay of Plenty. And so we've got extreme shaking in this scenario. Then if we look at the northern rupture scenario, again, pretty extreme shaking. Sorry, my arrows have turned around the wrong way. And then if we look at a central rupture scenario, again, still extreme shaking, okay? So what this means is that even though you may not be living in the coast, you're still going to feel a very strong earthquake, and that earthquake shaking will likely go on for minutes, okay? And during those minutes, you're going to drop, cover, and hold. So when we can kind of compare all of these different scenarios, and you can see we're going to, most of the country is going to feel pretty significant shaking for this sort of event, okay? So you're not going to be alone in this. So we're going to have an earthquake, and as we know, an earthquake can trigger a tsunami if that earthquake is offshore. An earthquake can also trigger landslides offshore and also on land. It can also cause liquefaction if we have sandy, silty material and like your water table there. And so when we kind of start building out the scenario, we know that there's going to be damage to buildings, damage to our roads, our communications infrastructure, as well as our pipes for our water infrastructure, and also our electricity network as well, because mostly they all travel along our roads as well. So we've got our initial hazard, which is the earthquake, and then we have our secondary hazards and then our tertiary hazards. So that's all the other things that follow on afterwards. So usually in terms of our life safety, that's usually around any damage to buildings is where we kind of see that, or when it comes to inundation as well. But really, when we're looking at kind of any hazard scenario, it comes down to these kind of like 5 different things. You either have to evacuate because you are in an inundation zone from either tsunami, or you could even be in a flood zone. You might get stuck where you are because you're between two landslides on your road. You may have no phone or internet because the comms towers are down from the earthquake shaking, or the backup power could be used up within the time because you have no power, because again, they've been impacted by the shaking or a landslide's come down, and potentially you have no water for those kind of like more city-based, because the shaking and the liquefaction has affected the underground like infrastructure as well. So planning for those kind of 5 things like helps you for any kind of hazard event that may occur in this region, okay? And that's what we call impacts-based planning as well. So as long as you know how to keep yourself safe in terms of drop covering hold, evacuating out of an inundation zone in terms of tsunami or a flood zone, we know we can kind of keep ourselves safe, and then it's a matter of keeping ourselves comfortable after that, okay? So number 1 priority is life safety, and then next is kind of being comfortable. And I know I've probably scared you a whole lot with all these different scenarios and what can go on, but the story doesn't end there when we're talking about earthquakes. So with earthquakes and large earthquakes, we also expect large levels of aftershocks after event, okay? So what this means is that once that initial event happens, it's not really quite over just yet. So what we've also done is we've built out an aftershock scenario. And what this shows is the number of earthquakes that we'd expect, or aftershocks, sorry, after that initial earthquake over the kind of coming, I think it's like a 9-month period. And so you can see here that these dots on this map are all different earthquakes that occur from February through to so over a 10-month period. And what we've done is actually superimpose the Japan aftershock sequence onto New Zealand. So that red dot is the main initial Japan earthquake, if that makes sense. And then the other dots are all the Japan aftershocks as well. And they've molded it to make it realistic for a New Zealand scenario. So what do we also know about earthquakes that occur off the coast?
They create tsunamis.
They create tsunamis, well done. So that means that our aftershocks also have the potential to create ongoing tsunami events. So what this means is that it's really going to slow down our recovery, because every time we feel another long or strong earthquake, we're going to evacuate, okay? So what that means is that we're actually planning probably not to be in the evacuation zone, to decrease our risk to like our life safety as well. So it's just a consideration what that means in terms of like moving populations as well. Okay, so we're going to have, it's really a long term. So with this type of event, we'd actually intend to see like a large number of earthquakes for probably like a decade after that initial event. Okay, and it is, Christchurch lived through, hundreds of aftershocks.
Interesting to see a graphic of that in the sizes and the pulsing up.
Yeah.
Last one I saw was over 2 years. 2 years at least when it was done, so it's still happening on decreasing frequency.
Yeah. So when we're looking at our planning, it's really important that we start thinking about our timescales as well. Oh, why am I skipping ahead? Okay. And so, as I said earlier, I guess our first priority is around keeping people safe. And so we know the actions to do that. And the next bit is around keeping people comfortable. So meeting their basic needs in terms of food, warmth, shelter. Okay. And so this may look differently to what it has done in the past. For example, in Japan in 2011, there was a whole lot of people living in tents, and they were also relocated. I think it was like over 200,000 people 10 years after the earthquake were still not back living in the same area that they were beforehand. Okay, so it's just another scale altogether. Okay, so now I've done the doom and gloom. This is the bit where we talk about what we can expect and what we can do as well, because there is. So I have no doubt in my mind that we can turn this squiggly line into more of a wiggle line based on what we plan to do for prepare. Oh, this is the slides I thought I had earlier. So this was based on a 2015 survey, and we asked people what they would expect to do before evacuating. So scenario 1 was a long or strong earthquake, so that's kind of similar to a Hurricane Subduction Zone scenario. And it saw that most people said that they'd evacuate around 1 to 10 minutes after that earthquake, okay? But what we really needed people to do is when we put that into our modeling, any kind of delay increases the number of fatalities that we see in those models. So what this is, we're really trying to encourage people is as soon as you feel that long or strong earthquake, you evacuate immediately because we know it improves people's chance of getting to safety. We also asked them how they'd evacuate, and as you can see again, most people said they'd evacuate by car. So this works in areas, in the more rural areas where we know we're probably going to see less likely congestion, whereas in the more city and urban areas, it is advised not to evacuate by cars because we do see high levels of traffic jams as well. And we'd also like to see more people evacuate by bike. Okay, so what we can do, really important to practice your drop, cover and hold. Incredible to see that Tairāwhiti has really high statistics for this, for shakeout, where we do practice it, as well as your tsunami hikoi. And I'd also advise practicing multiple different evacuation routes because you just don't know what's going to occur on the day. The next thing you can do is talk about it. So if you guys go away and tell one person, one fact that you've learned about today, you're helping spread this message in terms of being more aware about the risk and also what you can do. You also now know what may happen, and I find that when you know what may happen, you kind of have a better handle control of the situation in terms of how you can prepare about it as well. What I recommend is going home and making a plan, looking about those scenarios in terms of what you do if with no power, water, food, have to evacuate or stay at home. And also think about how you can help others, okay? Because after Cyclone Gabrielle, I evacuated from my home. We were luckily able to come back in. I had a barbecue, my neighbors didn't, and so we were cooking on my barbecue and using some of their meat from the fridge, okay? So it's also about how you come together as a community to kind of look after and support each other. And we also show that those community networks really increase after an emergency, and it also really supports your own recovery when you help other people as well. So we want to think about a plan for at home, at school, and also for at work. Okay, so those are kind of the 3 main places that we spend quite a lot of our time. And of course, at home, it's kind of easier to control and manage because it's usually just a household unit. At school, it's really important for parents to check their school plan, but also trust in that school to deliver that plan as well. So there's a really heartbreaking story from Japan where, unfortunately, parents didn't know their school's evacuation plan, so went into the evacuation zone, and the kids were already outside the evacuation zone, and unfortunately, some of those parents didn't actually survive, okay? So we need to trust that the school is looking after your child and getting them to safety, so it's looking after your own well-being as well. Schools also need to practice that plan, and it can be really easy in terms of a couple of teachers practicing it first, and then doing it even like class by class if it's too difficult to do a whole school over time. And of course, talk to your employer about what their plan is so that they also know that if you do feel a long or strong earthquake and you're evacuating, you're doing so for your safety as well. And also what their procedures are if you have other people around you. Okay. So that is a wrap up today. And I just wanted to, again, thank you guys all for coming along, and also to those listening online. At the back of the room, I have these different jars, so if you wouldn't mind popping a pebble in the jar as to whether you found today valuable, not so valuable, or like you thought this was a waste of time, and this is just a way to measure if it's a valuable experience. And then we've got time for questions. Cool.
How strong are our bridges? Because that's the only route to
The
safety.
theory, yeah.
So if we have a 9 magnitude quake, are those structures going to be standing? This case scenario.
I don't know the specifics. So the question was, what are the strength of our bridges in Gisborne? I don't know the specific details in terms of the bridges, but usually bridges, when they're designed by engineers, will be designed for a set magnitude. What you'll tend to find from, I guess, overseas studies is that the bridge will be relatively stable, but it's actually the abutments, so the connectors between the road and the bridge is kind of the issue there. And so it's just a matter of, I guess, relying on that engineering structure. Yeah, I can't.
The main bridge at Roebuck Road, for instance, 1958, the other one's 100 years old, so they'll have different engineering stuff would have gone into them. I can tell you the one at Roebuck Road has got pretty significant, they're 23 metres when they were designed, so that's quite a long way down and they're pretty thick, but where they cut them off I can't tell you because they don't record on the records, but yeah, I can't answer that, it's an engineering question. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Have you heard about the triangle of life where you're supposed to shelter down under a couch so that if the roof falls, you're in that triangle? That's where they find a lot of people that are alive in structural collapse.
So that has been internationally disproved by research.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that one has been going around as like an email for like, I think the last decade. But recent research from like New Zealand and other countries that have like really decent building standards show that's like incorrect. And so the correct action is drop, cover, and hold. Okay, and also not doorways. Yeah, so we say drop, cover, and hold. You can also like, I guess, look around what may fall down around you. So if you're like had a big bookcase that wasn't secured, which you should have it secured to the wall, but we say move no more than a few steps to drop, cover, and hold. You can go under tables or desks, but it is really just that protective. So no, triangle of life has been disproved by research. Any other questions?
I think the biggest thing I've learned from tonight is where you said plan for at home, plan for at work, plan for at school, to make sure your family is aware if we are split up, what would happen. Because I used to be on the St. Mary's and the Campion board, and quite a few parents would be like, no, I don't trust the school. I will come into that zone and get my kid. So I think you need to empower your kid and be the adult and say you will have to stay there because these people know what they're doing. So I think a big discussion of what really struck with me tonight is that we need to talk, what if we are split up and trust where we are? And also what Laura said, if you're on that side of the bridge and the bridge is gone and I'm on this side of the bridge, we need to be confident that in our spaces we look after ourselves and others. Because we do not know what will happen to our bridges, because slash can push it over, or like Lyle said, the abutments can go in even if it's well designed, the abutments can go.
100% agree with that. Yeah. I think, like, so when I was evacuating, the last text message I was able to send was to my parents to say, I'm evacuating to blah, blah, blah. And then we had no comms down for 12 hours. And so they're also not in Hawke's Bay, they're in Auckland. So you can also imagine that kind of concern. So them knowing where I was going and my plan was like so important to also reassure them. So it is really important to consider your meeting place with your loved ones for that event as well. So really key advice there. Okay, I'll hand back over to Ben.
Thanks, Kate. Always pleasure really having you take us through and demystify and detechnologise if that's a word, the presentation in the science. And probably a couple of things I might highlight too, and they actually are probably aspects of good news, and particularly having sat in with the council consultation for the indoor multi-sport centre. So Kate made reference to the Costa School. If you look that up, it's in Freeport. Is it Freeport in Washington State? I've actually been there myself. Last year, what that's presented for us with the, which was passed by council, for the indoor multi-sport centre to have a built-in component for the structural vertical evacuation. So this is going to be based down by the Kiwa pools. We've still got some challenges to go through in terms of funding, but really what we're going to do is look to connect the kaupapa to the community in terms of the why, and that really we won't not die trying to really get that component engineered into that facility. At present, and where it was presented at council, was $1.65 million in terms of that cost to make it a structural facility to use the roof, similar to what they have done in Washington State. And if we do that here, it'll be the first facility of its kind in New Zealand, and actually in the Southern Hemisphere. So I guess you're along tonight really listening to what certainly the science talks about. Regionally, what we're going to need is the advocacy to support council and really the benefit for the community with this facility. And I know that we're really keen to make sure we get everyone leaning in for that. Just the other aspects really, and if I will take reflections from the 5th of March 2021, everything Rahit spoke about, the confusion, really what it takes to get the connection with, particularly with parents and driving from the outer tsunami zone across to the other side of town to Campion. There's actually more induced risk with people making, probably going against where the psychology should be around actually getting out of the zone, going back into that zone, and actually it severely impedes the ability for the schools and the teachers in particular, who are really going to be looking to get and be trusted to get the children out of it. And that's what our kaupapa and our hui is about tomorrow, with the principals and the board of trustees, to really muscle up and make sure we've got that plan there. Our day job and our primary main effort in a readiness space is related to the catastrophic risk. And for this region with Hikurangi, that's a 25% chance in the next 50 years. And that was issued by GNS 3 years ago. Now, if you put the Alpine fault in the comparison with that, that's a 75% risk in that same timestamp. So for NEMA, as the National Emergency Agency and the custodian of the system, really both the Hikurangi magnitude 9, which I think we've given ourselves a 0.1 uplift there, Kate, and the Alpine fault are really the start state for all of our planning across the New Zealand space there. So, yeah, thank you for coming along tonight. We have, and I appreciate you guys can do a shout out to, we're going to run the same session tomorrow, and then equally for, as I mentioned, with the schools, 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, and we'll be live streaming both those sessions as well.
Thanks, Ben.
Do we have a siren?
Not as part of the, so this is another one that Kate will, in terms of research around the aspects. So I guess, Kate, you can look to that.
So sirens, another one that we have seen. So for New Zealand, there's like probably 1 or 2 regions, I'd say, where it's valuable. But because our tsunami source is our local source, that natural warning sign is effectively our siren. That's our natural sign and signal to evacuate to safety, is the earthquake itself, yeah. When we see sirens in place, like they've used them in Japan in the past, what they tend to see is that, one, people sometimes don't hear them because it depends on the wind. It requires someone or something to trigger it. It also requires then on technology and also on power. So there's so many failures that are possible in that system that effectively it means that when we do have sirens in place, people don't make decisions for themselves because they're relying on something else to then make a decision to act. Whereas that natural warning sign, we want people to take their own individual responsibility to say, yes, that's a long or strong earthquake, I'm now evacuating. So we don't recommend the use of sirens because what it means in terms of people's behaviour, but also they're unreliable in terms of like a warning option. So working up the coast, it was really cool going up to Hicks Bay, Tairāwhiti. I think there must have been an earthquake in 2015. No.
209 was the
20
last biggie here.
209? No, because it would have been 20 something. Maybe a little bit later than that. And
It was 100.
well, that was the triplet. I think it was before the triplet.
Some tsunami activity in the river between 209 and now. I just can't remember what year it
Yeah.
was. We're somewhere far away.
But so after that event went up to the communities up there because we were doing some research in terms of how people evacuated following the event that I researched. Sorry, I can't remember the date. And it was really cool to hear that that community had decided that if it was like a nighttime event, because they were worried that people might not like wake up, if it was like a long earthquake and not necessarily strong. And so one of the things that they agreed as a community were that they were going to like beep their horns as that they were evacuating to wake up other people because they're a rural area, so evacuating by car, there was going to be no congestion, but also just another mechanism that was just like relying on their own resources and their own community kind of like capacity and knowledge to help other people to safety. And so would recommend that as like so much more valuable than one tsunami siren that could cost $60,000, and you need however many of them that may also fail. Does that answer that?
Yeah, it's actually always a question though, Laura, that's comes through. But equally, just in terms of actually getting the action to move, a real problem start really when we actually are dealing with particularly that scenario. All of our emergency services are in the tsunami zone on the wrong side of the river. So that really in terms of start state for response, and equally we're aware of this as a collective, but equally it's a challenge because we can't magic up new police stations, fire stations, and relocate large facilities. But our planning does look at how we can actually try and work around with that. Right, well, I'll just close this with a karakia and then give you your evening back. And thank you for those online. Unfortunately, we couldn't capture any questions, but if you do have any, connect through our Facebook. We do monitor that, and we'll look to hopefully provide something by way of an answer for you. Kia no tātou, e te atua, e mihi ane kia koe, mo te whakakota i a mātou i tēnei rā, ki te kawi a mātou mahi me te whakatūtuku i o mātou whānga. Manaki katoa mo te rātou haringa ki te kāinga, āmene.
Thank you.